and Mack voted best law firm and best personal injury lawyer 4 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you with us here today. You should say that with an Irish brogue.
That's right, yeah. It's a couple generations ago.
Yeah, okay. Well, you're probably a little bit Americanized.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, we're talking all this month about colon cancer,
Right.
About the dangers of colon cancer, about how a study came out just a week or so ago saying that it's now an alarming trend of younger people getting colon cancer, younger than ever before, and it's rising. It's the only cancer incidence that is rising among young population of the top 5 cancers that are studied in America. That's a scary thing.
It is. You know, I've been doing colon cancer for 30 years now, and it used to be rare when I'd have somebody in their 40s with colon cancer. Just this year, I've done 2 patients in their 30s with colon cancer. No family history. But that, you know, as we see younger and younger patients with colon cancer, you know, it does raise the question of genetic links that we didn't used to know about, you know, and now anybody under the age of 50 who has a colon cancer, we check for any genetic mutations on them at this point too.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've talked before about there are a variety of factors that could be at play here, making it so that younger and younger people are coming up with colon cancer. It could be dietal. It could be as well the genetics. It could be a pretty volatile mix of the two.
Right. You know, genetics only accounts for a small percentage of the patients, even in very young patients that we find. And we hope to find a genetic mutation because that opens up our immunotherapy options for colon cancer treatments. And I've seen some amazing, you had Dr. Mukamala on last week. I've seen him and Dr. Ramanini do some immunotherapy on patients with very large, bulky tumors and shrink them away. You know, so that's just fantastic advancements. But you're correct. You know, unfortunately, obesity is rampant among this country nowadays, and obesity has a direct link to increased cancer risks, notably colon cancer and breast. But, you know, so if obesity actually has increased the risk of colon cancer. But, you know, what we put in our bodies, too, changes the risk of colon cancer. You know, I've said before, I like red meat and I like a steak, you know, but eating red meat on a daily basis is not good for you, you know, and it's been directly linked. High fat, fats or diets high in red meats actually increase your risk of colon cancer as well. You know, I also say, you know, I love, you know, Pepperidge Farm and Thomas's English muffins and everything else, and they're just, you know, 2 brands that I'm aware of, but they shouldn't last in your bread drawer for 2 months. You know, I always say Thomas's English muffins will last the apocalypse. You know, what's in those? You know, what are we putting in our body that are these preservatives? You buy fresh bread, you better eat it in less than a week or it's moldy. You know, so what are all those preservatives? You know, undeveloped countries have a much lower incidence of colon cancer, and you don't see a McDonald's, Burger King, and everything on every corner. You know, our use of fast foods and the, you know, the, not to get on the social impacts, but, you know, our pressured society where we're running, and I did it with our kids. You know, we're running everywhere for all these sports and activities and everything, and we're getting food on the go all the time. Sure. You know, and we don't eat right, and that's a big part of it. You know, the hormones that were put in our food when you and I were growing up, you know, fortunately there's not a lot of that today. The pesticides from when you and I were growing up also, I'm sure, make a difference as well. A lot of environmental effects.
Microplastics are a big deal now, and I don't know that they relate to colon cancer, but they're finding microplastics in virtually everybody's blood now.
Yeah, you know, back in the 50s and 60s, we didn't have, you know, bottled water in plastic bottles everywhere. You know, whether that, you know, will be related to colon cancer or not is yet to be seen. There just aren't enough studies out there. But, you know, finding plastic in your blood can't be good, you know. So.
Sure. All of it, of course, leads to the idea that early detection is really important. Detection before it becomes cancer is ultra important.
Right. You know, and recently in the last few years, the American Cancer Society decreased their screening age from 50 to 45 because of the incidence of cancer in younger patients. And that's if you have no family history whatsoever. I personally feel it probably should be 40, you know, because I'm biased because I see the colon cancers. But, I do feel that that's not even young enough to start colon cancer screening. There's a lot of things out there. Cologuard is a pretty, non-invasive way to check for cancer DNA in your stool. It doesn't pick everything up, but it's better than nothing. But it doesn't substitute for somebody who's at high risk. If you're at high risk, then you need a colonoscopy.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's get into that. Colonoscopy is going to catch the polyps before they become cancer. You've said it often.
Right. Yeah, you get a colonoscopy and they find a polyp and they take it out, you've just prevented a cancer. If you don't and you prolong it and you don't get that colonoscopy done, there could be a polyp growing in there silently that you don't even know, and it develops into a cancer. In average patients, not these young patients with the tumors, they tend to be more aggressive tumors, but in average patients, it takes about 5 years or more for a polyp to develop into a cancer, a typical polyp. So getting in there and getting the colonoscopy done can prevent that from becoming a cancer, and then you don't need to see somebody like me for colon surgery.
Mm-hmm. That process whereby the polyp grows from a polyp into a cancer can take place over a longer period of time, 4 or 5 years. It can be a shorter time, though, can't it?
Right, and that's why I say the younger patients, it can grow quicker than that. It depends on the aggressiveness, the subtype of the tumor. It used to be you had colon cancer. We just treated you by stage. Now we look at it microscopically. We look at the pathologic grade. We look at how many mitoses are occurring in the cell. And we really look at how aggressive the tumor is, and that guides therapy as well.
Yeah. So we want to prevent it by getting rid of the polyps as quickly as we can. We want to do the frequent screenings, whatever the doctor recommends for the screenings. What happens if we don't catch it and it becomes a cancer?
Well, then you're seeing somebody like me, and we need to get it out of there for you. And hopefully when we do catch it with the cancer, we caught it before it spread, and the way cancers spread is they invade into the wall of the colon, and in the wall of the colon are where the blood vessels and lymphatic channels are. And they can float down those channels to either lymph nodes or off to other areas in your body. All the venous drainage from the intestines goes through the liver first, and that's why the liver is the #1 spot for spread of colon cancers. So we do a staging after that. So if you get diagnosed with colon cancer and you're referred to somebody like me, we get CAT scans to look at the liver, to look at the lymph nodes prior to saying whether or not we can proceed with surgery. Because if it's already in the liver, then the horse is out of the barn. Then doing surgery isn't going to prevent further spread. Surgery doesn't cause spread. That was an old wives' tale.
Yeah.
And that's because they used to leave surgery as the last resort, and so it was already spread and you were, tried everything else that failed, let's do surgery. Nowadays, we know if we have great staging techniques with CAT scans and other tests that we can look to see if it's spread. And if it's not spread, we can get in there and get it out. And potentially that could be the only treatment you need.
Is robotic surgery a part of the colon cancer treatment protocol? When you do your surgeries, does the robotic surgery actually help you to really target specific areas and limit the damage to other areas?
Yeah, robotic surgery is huge in this area. Like I said, I've been doing colon cancer for over 30 years. And, I'm back in the day when we did them open. And you would stay in the hospital at least a week, oftentimes 2 weeks. Where I used to be prior to coming here, I did a study. The patients who had open colon surgeries had an average stay of 12 days. The patients at that point who had robotic surgery had an average stay of 3 days. Most of my patients go home in 1 day now after robotic surgery. We believe it's because of the precision. You don't have the release of all the inflammatory enzymes. We can feed you right away after robotic surgery because your bowels don't shut down like open surgery. And even with laparoscopic, doing minimally invasive without the robot, the average length of stay is still 2 days longer, 2 to 3 days longer. So there's something with the robotics, whether it's precision or what, that we can actually get you out of the hospital a lot faster, get you recovered a lot faster. I have patients walking in my office at 2 weeks, very elderly patients that don't look like they had surgery.
Colon cancer, the saying is always it's treatable, it's beatable, but it's also deadly if it is not treated, correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the #1 killer of men and women cancer killer of men and women in this country now. Lung is still top as far as death rates, but when the colon cancer has increased drastically now, I should say lung is number one, slightly above colon, but colon is, there's debate nowadays this year as to which one's the top killer. It used to always be lung. Lung is still there, but colon cancer death rates have actually increased because of the increased risk in younger patients. We're doing better in older patients. So, the survival in older patients is better, but because we're seeing these younger patients with more aggressive tumors, that's a very big concern.
Somebody who might be in the early stages of colon cancer and suspects there's something wrong, say they're in their late 30s, early 40s, should they be going to their doctor and saying, hey, I want to get this checked out?
Absolutely. The number one finding is, a little blood in the stool. And even, it's not as much prevalent nowadays, but it used to be if you were in your 40s or younger and you had blood in your stool, oh, it's hemorrhoids, and that's kind of like the classic mistake. Don't assume it's hemorrhoids. Tumors above the rectum can actually cause congestion and lead to hemorrhoids. They can cause constipation and straining, lead to hemorrhoids. So change in bowel habits, is one thing. So like I said, you go in, you get checked. If you have change in bowel habits, they can order a Cologuard if nothing else is indicated. Check the stool for blood, although we don't do that as much anymore. It's not all that accurate. But, you might be referred for colonoscopy. So I always say don't ignore those change in bowel habits that occur because there's no one specific symptom for colon cancer. It causes, irritable bowel. It causes change in the size and caliber of your stool, maybe a little blood in your stool, maybe a change in color of your stool, to a darker stool. So it's not like all of a sudden you have pain from colon cancer. By the time you're having pain, unfortunately, it could be very advanced.
Yeah. All right. So get it checked out. Don't take a chance that it isn't. Find out if it is.
Right.
There you go.
And like I say, we do a lot of genetics nowadays for colon cancer. So if you have a family history of colon cancer, it's a thing called Lynch syndrome. There's 4 different genes that can have a mutation to them. So if you have a family history of colon cancer or endometrial uterine cancer in the family, that's something that you should see somebody about genetic counseling and look at that to see if you carry one of those Lynch genes. Then we would recommend screening at a much early age and be able to prevent a colon cancer. So if you have a family history of colon cancer or any cancers, talk to your doctor or just give our office a call. Myself and Dr. Bill Moria both do cancer screening, genetics. And, I've been doing it for a long time. And Dr. Bill Moria became a certified genetic counselor last year. And we can check you for any genetic mutations too.
It's amazing that the number of people probably that do not know what their family history is.
Right.
Yeah. Got to learn that too.
Our parents' age never talked about their health history.
That's true. That's true. He's Dr. Dan Clark. Thanks for the journey in this morning in the icy roads.
Yeah.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It is WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. Westwood One Sports next.